Hello and welcome to the WorkJoy Jam podcast. I'm your host, Beth Stallwood, and my guest today is the fantastic Danielle Thompson. And Danielle runs a business that helps organisations, small businesses, people to think about their profit and their purpose together, and to think about how to become more sustainable, more environmentally friendly, better for your people, better for your local community. It's a really interesting conversation that really sparked some ideas in me and helped me to consider actually what I want to do in my business, and I hope it might do the same for you, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you are a leader in a business, whether you're an employee in a business, and how you might be able to take some of these small things, to take those small steps towards becoming more sustainable. I really hope you enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome to the WorkJoy Jam. I am so excited today to be joined by Danielle Thompson of Sustainably. Really excited for this conversation. But before we get started, Danielle, can I hand over to you and can you tell us a bit about who you are, what you do? I feel a bit like Cilla Black, like who are you, where you come from? And a little bit about your story and how you got to the amazing things that you are doing today. So over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Beth. Yeah, really looking forward to this conversation. So, yeah, I'm Danielle Thompson. I run a company called Sustainably. And essentially, I really focus on helping businesses to change their business and operating model to be more a force for good. So how can they still be profitable, but do it in a way which is focused on purpose and doing the right thing? So, and really my sort of background, I started off in corporate. So I worked for National Grid, which is a big kind of gas and electricity company in the UK, and that kind of corporate career was a brilliant foundation for learning all sorts of things about business. And in a big corporate, you kind of move around a lot and you do a lot of different jobs. Absolutely loved it, and I probably wouldn't have ever left that because it was a secure, good, progressive job there. But I then myself and my husband got offered the opportunity to move to Australia.
Wow.
So we both moved to Australia for 3 years, and I think it was there. I worked again for a big corporate in Australia, but I think there I sort of realised, the Aussies love life and enjoy life outside of work, and they work hard, but they really work to live, not the other way around. So my whole kind of approach to work-life balance and working in a very positive way sort of got cemented when I was in Australia. So when I came back, I decided I wanted to work more in small businesses and really get some experience in how to run a business. And there's no better way, I don't think, as much as a kind of small business there is. So I joined a small company, a small creative agency, ended up running the agency, and all the kind of ups and downs and emotional roller coaster that comes with running a small business. But it was a very purpose-led business. So that's where I really started to understand how purpose can play a role in an organisation, and how you can be commercial as well as be good and responsible and ethical. So when during the pandemic, I decided, actually, you know what, I want to really sort of spread my own wings and do my own thing and make my own kind of impact on the world. So that's where I decided to set up on my own and really focus on using my kind of really broad experience that I'd got from all my various roles across the years to help predominantly small companies change how they work so that they are both profitable and making money, but doing it in the right way. And that's really where I sort of focus now with things like B Corp and helping organisations to do both of those things. That's my kind of passion, really.
So interesting, and what an interesting story. And like, I can just imagine that. Do you want to go and work in Australia? And yes, I definitely do want to go and do that. How exciting an opportunity to take. And actually, it's really interesting about how that experience changed what you thought about in your career and how you took that forward.
And it was really interesting when I moved to Australia and we were sorting out jobs. I said, are really clear to my husband, I'm only going if I've got a really good job to move to. This isn't going to interrupt my career. I want a high powered job. I want to be well paid. That's the only reason I'm going. When we came back to the UK, I didn't have a role to come back to. I was like, oh, you know what? I'll figure it out. It'll be fine. So the change in those kind of few years really was quite noticeable.
It's amazing, isn't it? How the unexpected can come from one decision in life, can really actually change everything else that happens in the future.
Yeah, completely, absolutely. And that was definitely, I think, just an interruption to the normal way of, and also just seeing what's out there really kind of opened my eyes up to that.
Yeah. And I'm really interested. So, number one, starting a new business during a pandemic, always an interesting thing to think about. And number two, well, there's probably like number 12 and 13 as well within this, is I'm just sitting here listening to you about this idea of profitable and doing it in the right way, and how often we think it's a choice of one or the other when actually it can be both.
Yeah, and I think the world has shifted. I think pandemic has accelerated what was already there. But I still think predominantly there is a feeling that you are either a commercial business, you are for profit, you are a kind of limited company or whatever that is, or you are a social enterprise or a charity or a not-for-profit. And actually, you can completely do both of those things. You can completely be very commercially successful and profitable, but you can do that whilst not damaging the environment, whilst being diverse, while looking after your people. And it's starting now. People are starting to realise you can do both of those things at the same time. The challenge often, though, is how and what does that actually look like.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely that whole, they're not mutually exclusive. And I think people are starting to understand that much more.
Yeah. And it's such an important thing for us all to think about. And I'm just thinking about from a WorkJoy perspective, whether people are running their own businesses, kind of in the entrepreneurial space, or whether they're in organizations. I think there is a growing want and need from people in business, in work, whatever, however you define your work, to want to do more in this area of kind of doing good work. I think there is definitely, from my experience, a groundswell of people saying, hang on a minute, I'm not sure I want to work somewhere that isn't thinking about these things. I'm not sure it is for me all about the kind of well-paid job, the profit stuff. I think it might be about more than that and wanting to have more than that. But what you're saying is you can actually have them both.
Yeah,
we can work on both these things. So
absolutely. And I think, and that's the bit, because I think if it's just about doing the right thing all the time at the expense of being profitable, well, actually that's not sustainable in long term.
Yeah.
So in order to have a mission and to do the right thing, you've got to be able to make money and sustain yourself and grow over time. So one definitely supports the other. But again, I think it's trying to make that accessible and affordable and appropriate for all businesses, not just the ones who happen to already be there.
Yeah. And, we've got to remember most of the businesses in the UK are actually small businesses. The big corporates don't make up most of the employment opportunities in the UK. It's often smaller businesses that do. But those businesses are often the ones that can't necessarily, they don't have the big teams who are working on, the ESG stuff or your sustainability mission, or have people who are there. So tell me a little bit, this is where I'm going to kind of pick your brains now, if you're up for it, is tell me a bit about where a small business or an organization might start if they're thinking, actually, so I'll sit here and I'll say to you, I would love to be able to think about my business, to think about what I'm doing, to maybe think about the B Corp stuff. I'd love to know more about where you would suggest people start and what we can think about.
And you're absolutely right with small businesses. I think that they are the engine of the UK economy. And unfortunately, a lot of the attention has been placed on the big corporates, understandably, I guess. But really, to make this kind of business as usual, it has to apply it to all businesses, certainly smaller businesses. But if you're kind of looking, like you say, wanting to start, the place I always sort of say to people is, start from what the impact is you want to have. So like you would write a mission statement, but think about it as to what's the positive impact you want your business to have and to whom. So is it about you want to be you want to do a lot in the environmental space. You want to be really changing your business so you are a positive contributor to the environment? Is it about you're in a very male dominated sector and you want to improve diversity? Is it about improving social mobility in your local community? And everything in between. So start thinking about what do you want your company to stand for from a social and environmental perspective, because I think that helps to then first of all make it quite real and make it more tangible. And also, again, from a small business, you can't do everything, so it starts to just focus in on where you want to focus your resources and your effort. So if it is about environment, then you can focus there. You can start unpicking that a little bit more. If it's about diversity, you can start looking at your recruitment and your employee value proposition. It just helps to start prioritizing where you're going to focus. It doesn't mean you don't do the other stuff, but and I think having that kind of positive impact statement, like you have a mission statement, it then can act as that kind of central reference point. You can keep coming back to it. So I always sort of say to people, just start with what's the impact you want your business to have and be able to articulate that, because by default then it will be easier then for you to work out what that then looks like. It's really hard when you're starting from a blank sheet of paper.
Yeah. And I think that's the scary thing, isn't it? It's because, you're talking about you can do loads of things for the environment. There's loads of things about diversity, there's social mobility. I think sometimes we get a bit deer in the headlights about this stuff, and it's almost there's so many things we could do that finding the next step of what we can do and what we will do feels really difficult. Yet actually sitting there and really considering what do we stand for, like we would in our mission statement, like we would when we're maybe thinking about our organization's values or different things like that, is actually what is it that we really care about and what is the impact we want to have, and then really considering, so what would the actions be towards that? And it's so good to hear you say it's not about doing everything straight away, because right, everyone has limited time and resources and ways to make some of these things happen. But I'm loving the idea of like just starting somewhere. That's it. I mean, it's so simple, isn't it? It's like, well, obviously just start somewhere, but there is something there about that pressure. Sometimes easing that pressure means that you get more done.
And I think there's a positive. People genuinely want their business to make a difference. People see all these other companies out there who are doing amazing things, and people want their company to do the same, and it's honorable and brilliant. But especially for a small business, it's just not realistic. So it's about looking at where can you prioritize. And that's not to say you'll stop there. You'll grow and you'll develop and you'll do more, but just really. And also I think looking at what is important to you, what's important to your team, if you have got a team, bringing them into that conversation, because there could be causes or issues that they're really passionate about and can support sort of moving forward. So there's a whole range of ways to do it, but the key point being is have a look at what you want your company to stand for from a society point of view, and how can you articulate that, because that will help you then take those first steps.
Yeah. And I think what you're talking about here is something that I'm always banging on about when it comes to WorkJoy stuff, is progress over perfection. Like just think about what progress could you make and what small steps could you take, versus we should have perfect environmental scores, diversity scores, social media. This stuff takes time and effort and things. It doesn't always come straight away. So actually that aiming to always be progressing in it, I think, could be really helpful in terms of a mindset to approach this stuff.
Yeah. And I think the other sort of barrier linked to that I see a lot is people are worried about getting it wrong. People really worry about putting something out on social media and getting called out because it's not the right thing to do, or that it's got going a certain direction, it turns out not to be right. And I think what I try and say to people is that if you've got good intentions, you generally make good decisions. So if you genuinely want to do the right thing and you genuinely want to be a better environmental company, you generally will choose the right thing to do. If you're doing it for the wrong reasons, that's where you're more likely to come unstuck. But if you're genuine about it, you will, and we all get things wrong and things change and develop, but that shouldn't be a barrier to starting.
Yeah. So step one is sit down, think about it, talk about it with your team,
Hmm.
talk about it in your organization. And I suppose actually, even if you are in a big business, if you've got something like a staff forum or an employee engagement thing or something that you want where you can go along and try and make a difference to your organization,
Hmm.
this could also be a great way of starting that conversation in a bigger organization. Get some people together, think about it. What type of impact do you want to have socially, environmentally,
Hmm.
in which way, and just see what comes up and see where
Yeah.
that leads you.
And ideas will come up that you haven't thought about, or causes that your team are really passionate about and can really get behind, because that's what's going to create the momentum. And
Yeah,
like I say, this isn't the end. So it's not saying, okay, we're really going to focus on diversity in our industry and that's all we're going to do. It's just your starting point. But it just helps you to start by having something you can get passionate about that will help you start the process, and then you can build from there.
yeah, love it. So great start. So here we go. Let's do an example. So if I sit down and we talk about my business and I say, okay, one of the things I'm really keen to do is to think about what is the environmental impact of my small business.
Hmm.
And I go, okay, right. So that's the thing we want to work on.
Yeah.
I want to be a sustainable, environmentally friendly, as much as is realistically possible,
Hmm.
organization. I'm picking that one because it's one of those
Yes.
things that's in my mind. And I go, okay, so I know, I kind of know what my mission is now. I know what I'm trying to do.
Hmm.
And then I sit there and go, okay. And I know that this is the kind of work that you would do. So you'd be sitting there advising me, wouldn't you? Be going, okay, so Beth, here's some things that you can do. And I'd love to know just some, what do other people do? What are some of the things we should be
Yeah.
looking at? And I saw the other day, it might have even been through something that you did. I'll just check this out. People were talking about the impacts of things like streaming music and streaming TV. And I was sitting there thinking, I have never even thought about that as
Mm.
something that is environmentally not very friendly. I've always just thought about it as, oh, isn't it great? I can watch some cool Netflix when I want to sit in my pajamas and do nothing all day. So there are probably some things that people don't even know about. So I'd just love to know, what are some of the areas we could all be considering?
Yeah, and I think again, I think it does depend on your business. So again, the first step, that kind of, if you're in wanting to work in that kind of area, is to look at your business and look where your biggest impacts are.
Yeah.
Um, and really, I mean, a way of doing that is just to map out a kind of customer journey or a production of products you make, and just work out really simply at a high level, where's the biggest impact here? Where am I using resources? And is it energy, which obviously for people on computers all day will be a significant one? Is it, I know I'm a product based business, so I'm shipping products around the country or potentially around the world. If I'm in um, a firm that uses a lot of paper, we're always printing contracts and marketing materials, paper might be a big one. So just looking at your business and just, from a common sense point of view, more than anything, where am I using a lot of resources here? And then you can start digging into the research and the advice around what's the best thing to do. Clearing down your inbox, not having loads of emails sat there, sending links rather than attachments on emails, that kind of thing. But the first step is to look at your business and work out where is your biggest impact, because then that will again help you to prioritize where to focus. A lot of people talk about carbon emissions and we need to work out our carbon. Well, actually, if you're not an energy heavy business, that might not be your biggest impact. It could be the amount of travel you're doing or the amount of resources you're using. So it's trying to just look at your individual business about where your biggest impact is, and then follow that through into what changes you can make.
Yeah. It's such an interesting one, isn't it? Because if you don't produce a product, it's more
Hmm.
detailed in your the online stuff maybe, or the
Yeah.
if you print, as you say, if you print stuff. And I have to say, i I find I'm a person who struggles to read things on a screen. Like, I like to print
Mm.
stuff out and I always think, oh, is this awful? But there's also that balancing of the reality of the business that you have, and which bits do you choose, and which bits are just because it's easier. Could you still do something a different way? That's quite a
Yes,
complicated
exactly. I think,
analysis, isn't it?
yeah, and part of it is just asking those questions of yourself. And, if you are printing a lot, or if you are, sending a lot of emails with attachments, or you are producing products, just asking yourself those kind of common sense, is there a better way of doing this? Is there a more efficient way? Could I recycle this in a different way? It doesn't need to necessarily be steeped in complicated technical science. It can just be almost a bit of a common sense approach, asking yourself those questions, because even by going through that process, you will be surprised what comes out, because you're just looking at things in a slightly different way.
Yeah, I love that advice. Like, actually, we're all sensible grown-ups. What is, Beth, if you can't read it online, you can't read it online. That's,
Exactly.
there's a reality to that. But what do you do around the recycling? How do you make sure that your paper is getting recycled properly and that you're not keeping loads of it for years on end and, not doing anything with it? And the same, about the online stuff, right? If you've got loads of attachments, if you're doing, I mean, I have to say, like, I am not a technologically advanced person. I would put myself in that category. So I have only recently gone on to like the in the cloud. I mean, I still don't really understand what the cloud is. But I realized I was keeping copies in the cloud and on my desktop and somewhere else and here. And I'm like, that in itself is wasting resources, right? You don't need all of those things. But the change there is it's a more of a mindset change, isn't it? About, but what if I need a backup? What if I need this?
Yeah.
That's a scary thing.
Yeah, and like you say, and that's the process of whatever the changes you're trying to go through. That's the kind of process of trying to work out, what is it I'm trying to get to? What's the kind of almost a change I've got to create in order to get to that outcome? And again, taking it in steps, doing your research, working out what's right for you and your business, and also the balance. It's not about never printing anything ever again. It's just saying, do you need to print everything you're printing right now? Can you be more efficient in how you're doing that? Can you look at how you can read things online more? It's not saying printing is bad and should be banned. So it's just asking yourself those questions and working out what's the right change for you and your business.
Yeah. And that's really great to hear, because I think so often we think it's an all or nothing process. And that's just not true. It's not true in anything in life, really. But there's that consideration ahead of, well, if I can't do that, I can't do anything. And it's like, well, that's very rarely true.
Yeah, and that goes for like this whole, whether it is environment, whether it's about diversity, whether it's about social good, it's not about absolutely nailing it from day one and being, the exemplar company. It's about taking those small steps and you doing what you can at that point, but trying to constantly build on it, and that will move you forward. Not doing anything is where you don't want to be.
Yeah, I love that. And just like drawing some steps out, thinking actually that advice of taking those really small steps actually also helps to build momentum, doesn't it? If we set ourselves too big a task and we think we've got to do everything, that often is where we end up with I feel like I failed and I haven't achieved anything. But if we break it down to really the small steps, that the things we could do, then actually once we've done those, we get that feeling of, oh, this is really great. And then that helps us to do the next thing and then the next thing on the list.
And also I think, especially in this space, not all the time obviously, but often, especially when you're starting out, a lot of the things you can do are common sense that we all know. We all, most people understand some of the things they could be doing. And so they're the ones you can start with. They're the obvious ones you can kind of get started. It's only when you get maybe into the real nitty gritty and you've done the first actions, you think, actually now I need to go and get some help, or I need to dig into this a bit deeper. But certainly to start with, there's always quite a lot of stuff we can all do relatively easily.
Love that. And it's little things, isn't it? Like, I just thinking one of the things that I've done in the last 2 years since I've been mainly working from home rather than working from other people's offices is like, this sounds really silly, but I love a fizzy water. It's like my favorite thing. It's my favorite drink on earth, which people are like, surely you choose wine or champagne. I'm like, no, I love a fizzy water. And I've gone from buying fizzy water in bottles, which is horrendously unsustainable and awful, to having a soda stream and glass bottles and like fizzing it myself from a tap. I'm like, right. So that is progress, in my opinion. Like that is something completely that you can do. And but I probably would never have thought about it as that's something that actually supports my business. That's about sustainability. I'd have just done it because I'm like, oh, this is terrible for the environment. But actually, those little things, if we can all think about them, are probably the little things that do add up in the bigger picture.
Yeah. And I think what we all kind of underestimate, I think sometimes we're all guilty of this, is our power of being a consumer or a customer, whether that's as a business or as an individual, in that, the more people that switch from plastic bottles to soda stream, guess what's going to happen? Suddenly they're not going to be as many plastic bottles, water sold in plastic bottles. It's going to be much more in glass, the kind of DIY option. So we have such power as consumers, whether we're buying for our business or we're buying for ourselves. And that's what's going to make change. If more people who ask those questions, who take those steps, even the small steps, that's what's going to create a wider change. So it might seem a really small thing that we're doing, but it does add up and it does have power. And we kind of forget sometimes the power as a consumer that we do have.
Yeah, and that's so true, isn't it? But the thing is, the power of the consumer doesn't change quickly; it changes over time, like that impact there. But I love that. And so can you tell me a little bit more? So I see a lot of this, and I'm always really keen when I see a company that I love that are like certified B Corp. I think, oh, I know that means I know they're good. And then I sit there and go, I only think I know that's good because of the marketing around B Corps, and I actually don't necessarily know enough about what a B Corp is.
Yeah.
And you know a lot about this. So can you tell us, what does that lovely little B Corp thing? And I go, oh, it gives me the warm and fuzzy. I'm being I always think if I'm being a good consumer when I see a B Corp thing. So I think, tell us a little bit more about what that really means.
Yeah. So in order to be, so when you see that little badge on, whether it's something you buy in the supermarket or you see a company that you're working with, basically what that means is they've been through a very vigorous, intensive assessment process across their whole business. And the reason why I like B Corp so much is because it looks at your whole business. It's not just about the environment. That's a big part of it, obviously, but it looks at your governance, at your reporting, how you treat your people, how you treat your customers. It looks at how you look after your data. It looks at how you contribute to society. And so basically to have got that badge, they've gone through an assessment and they've had to demonstrate how they work in a very positive way across all those things. So it'll ask you questions about your policies you've got in your employee handbook, the kind of policies you've got in place for maternity leave, for shared parental leave, for diversity. It'll ask you about your environmental management processes. It'll ask you about how you contribute to society. Do you do charity giving? All those kind of things. And it covers a whole wide, and it's a beast. It's an absolute beast of a process to go through because it's so comprehensive. So if you see that badge, that means that a company has been through that process and have been validated to say they do all of these things. And basically they have to have got to a certain level. And to give you an idea, kind of a normal company would probably score anywhere between 30 and 40 points in their assessment. In order to become B Corp, you have to get 80 points. Okay. So it's quite a step above the norm, if you like. And I kind of say you've got kind of normal companies who are working in a very traditional way, and they might be at the kind of 30 to 40 mark. You've then got B Corps, which have gone up, even further above that. And it's quite a stretch. So when you do see that, you can be confident that that business has been through that process and has looked at how they operate in a whole wide range of areas. It doesn't mean they're perfect. So a B Corp has to recertify every 3 years, and the idea is that you improve year on year. You're constantly improving and trying to better your score, basically. But what it can give you confidence is that company has really looked internally at how they can be this force for good from society and environmental perspective. So they're really kind of paving the way, I would say, in terms of how hopefully businesses will sort of work in the future.
So in my little brain, before you told me that, I had interpreted it as it was just about the environmental stuff, not right. It's got this wider picture. So thank you for educating me, because I'm like, oh, right. And then in my head, when you're talking about it, I'm thinking here going, okay, so the people who are looking for jobs, who want to work in organizations that genuinely care about this stuff, a B Corp search would be a good place to start if you're looking for organizations to work.
Yeah, completely. Right? Yeah. And they are, because there is a whole section about employees. And again, it's not saying that if you don't have B Corp, you don't treat your people well. What it's saying is that a B Corp goes over and above what you would expect. So it's really quite a high bar to reach. But yeah, absolutely. And people do look. I think there's even a jobs board for B Corp companies.
Oh, okay.
So because people want to work there, because they know they're going to be working for a company who has a purpose, who values society, values the environment, and will look after them well. So it's kind of a very easy way to tell you're a good egg, you're a good company. I'd like to work with you.
Yeah, and I think and I don't like to generalize the generations, because I think everyone is there's a lot of like putting people in boxes, which isn't my favorite thing to do. But when you look at the research on different generations and how the stuff around social governance, around the environment, becomes more and more important for every generation that comes along. Not saying that's not important for older generations, because it is, but it becomes a decision-making tool for people about whether they're going to join an organization. So I'm looking at this from two angles. The first one is, if you are an organization and you want to attract talent and you want great people to come and work for you and be engaged and be interested and do their best work for you, that could be an amazing tool to help you do it, because it looks at that side of business. And then on the other side, if you're a potential employee wanting to go and work for an organization, then that is something that you might want to look at as a test and an assessment that you're going to kind of be in an above and beyond type of organization versus your average organization. And then if you run a business, if you're in the entrepreneurial space, you're running a small business, it's about actually how could this attract customers, and as well as the kind of, you think it's important. It's because I imagine it again, like as a consumer, I'm like, I feel I get the warm and fluffies when I buy something from a B Corp.
Completely.
And now I'll get even more warm and fluffies. I'm like, it's
what it is.
What I thought it was.
And I think Waitrose and Boots now have got B Corp aisles in their online shop, so you can buy, you can search for and buy B Corp brands, for exactly that reason, because people are looking for brands that are ethical and responsible, and it can be really hard to tell. It is a bit of a minefield. So at least with something like B Corp, you can be much more assured. It's not 100%, but you can be more assured that company has been through that process. So, but absolutely, to your point, employees are looking specifically for those kind of companies and are willing to sacrifice the big salaries and all the perks if it means they work for a company that really genuinely cares. And again, B Corp is a way of being able to sort of shortcut that and go, actually, I know if they're B Corp, they're going to be good to me. I'm going to be well looked after and developed.
Yeah. And for me, there's something you're saying there that I think hits deeply, is this idea that they'd have to have cared about it enough to go through quite a rigorous process, right? And there is something about, if you couldn't be bothered, you probably wouldn't, if it's that hard. Right?
And it is. I think anyone who's thinking of B Corp, don't underestimate it. It's a big process, but both commercially and ethically and morally, it's worth it. But yeah, like you say, you've got to really care to go through the process. You wouldn't get to the end if you didn't, I don't think.
Yeah. So that, and as you say, it doesn't mean that they're perfect, but it means that there is in really good intent. There's good governance around it. There's things that are going on. So amazing. Thank you for that education. I'm loving it. And I totally didn't know that you could search by B Corp organisations. So I'm totally going to get on that and have a little look about how that works.
Yeah, it's fab. It's a really good tool.
Love it. So I'm thinking about timing, and I think we're going to need to move on to our quick fire questions, if that's all right with you. Right. Are you ready for these?
Go for it.
They're not too complicated. So obviously you have had a really varied career. You have worked in a kind of corporate, you've worked in small businesses, you're now running your own thing. I would love to know from you, what is something that's always guaranteed to bring you personally a little bit of work joy?
For me, it's about helping others to make a change, whatever that might be. So it's very much around educating, sharing my knowledge with others to help them That's where I get the warm and fuzzy feeling. And it's definitely where I feel like I'm doing my best work, is where I'm helping others to make good, positive change.
Love it. So you are perfect in your job you're doing now, because that's what you're doing every day.
It's a good, it's definitely a good match. I think I picked well.
You did pick well. Love it. Right. Second question from me. What book are you currently reading?
At the moment, I'm actually rereading a book that I've read a few times, and it is actually a business book, and it's called Traction by Gino Wickman, and it's basically a book about how to operate a business, and it's kind of got an operating model for high growth businesses. And I'm rereading that because I'm really interested in how profit and purpose can work together. So that book is quite driven around commerciality and building a profitable high growth business, and I'm really interested in looking at it with the lens of how can you bring those two worlds together more. So I've read it a few times. I'm now going back to it with a different mindset to go, okay, how could these two worlds come together even more successfully? So I'm actually in the middle of rereading that.
Oh, it sounds great. I'm totally gonna. This is the trouble when I do the podcast, that everyone's giving me amazing books, and then I just have massive piles.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. Yeah.
And I love the idea of reread. And I do this sometimes, is I either reread or I'll listen to it if I've read it, or vice versa, to get like a different perspective on what I've heard or read, because that sometimes just really helps you go, oh, okay, I could totally take this in a different way.
Yes, and I think something like Traction, it's a model that a business can follow. So it's very kind of similar in B Corp in terms of how it's laid out, but I think again, I'm reading it with a different lens, and I think that will bring different messages out and how you kind of bring those two things together. So yeah, I agree. I often reread books because you always learn something new, I think.
Oh, you totally do. And this question about it comes back to that beginning thing around, it doesn't have to be either commercial or purpose.
Yes.
Bring it together and see what doing it together can do. Love it. Right. What's the best or most useful bit of advice that someone has given you in your life that you find yourself going back to?
So I think the best one is from a friend of mine called Sarah King, and she said to me when I was kind of trying to work out what I wanted to do and what I wanted to set up and what it would all be, and I was kind of getting lost in the fact that I wanted to save the world. She just said to me, think big, start small, but just bloody well start.
Yeah.
And I think and coming back to our earlier conversation, it's so true, because you can get so lost in the big picture, and that can be so overwhelming. And actually it is just starting small, but you just do something, even if you're not quite sure where it's going, just do something, just move forward. So I do have to keep coming back to that.
It's a really good bit of advice, actually, wherever you are, whoever you are, isn't it? Is that we all can get stuck in a zone of overthinking stuff and trying to have a solution for everything. And it comes right back to the bit you were saying about, actually, with this stuff, just start somewhere, do something, and build that momentum from there. Don't worry, don't overthink about it being perfect. Just do something.
Yeah, completely the case.
Brilliant. And what is one super practical little bit of advice that our listeners, whether they're working in an organization, in a big corporate or a small organization, whether they're running their business, whoever they are, might be able to go away and do something tomorrow, the next day, something really simple and small to help them maybe think about sustainability a little bit more?
Yeah. So I think coming back to what I said earlier around, you've got huge power as a consumer. And the kind of best example, I think, is which most of us have got now is your pension. So whether it's a company pension or a personal pension, they invest a huge amount of money on your behalf, and they invest your money. So one of the best things you can do from a sustainability point of view is to speak to your pension provider, whether it's your company or your personal pension, and ask them where they're investing your money and is it ethical. So there's a growing now wave of pension companies and investments that are looking at ESG measures and ethical investments. But generally the market's quite slow to switch. So the more people that ask those questions, the quicker that's going to happen. And that's probably, the most money you're spending, apart from buying a house, most of your money will often go into your pension. So simply asking that question even if you never change, but just by raising that as a consideration will help to drive change. So if I was going to suggest anything, just ask that question your pension provider: where are you investing my money? Is it ethical?
Yeah, it's actually something I did a few months ago, and I hate talking about stuff like sensible things like pensions and stuff. I proper had to put my big girl pants on and have a proper grown up conversation about the future and money and all. I was like, oh gosh, I hate this.
Yeah.
But it was one thing that I was insistent on, is that if we were going to change anything, we would change it to be an ethical fund.
Yeah.
And what was really interesting in the conversation I had with the pension provider is that I started with the conversation, I want it to be invested ethically, because as you say, over time it becomes the biggest investment you make, probably apart from property, doesn't it? Is that I said it, and I said the following words to him. I said, and I don't mind if that means it's not as successful in terms of growth or money. And he turned around to me and said, Beth, they're all possibly even more successful now.
Yeah.
And actually the message, I think the messaging is starting to change. But in my head, I was thinking, if I'm going ethical, I won't make as much money. It's the same conversation about profit and purpose, isn't it? It's like, actually, some of those funds are now performing better because they're getting some traction, because things are, consumers are starting to swap them. And that doesn't mean that I won't sit there and review them regularly, because I think also, you know, again, a bit like things aren't perfect, are they? But I have to say, it did feel good to actually have that conversation and to go, right, what can I do as a consumer? And I totally forget about this, and I'm sure many people do, that as a consumer we do have power. I totally I was underusing my power there, and actually,
and most people do,
doing it and doing something about it. And as you say, you can't, if you're in an organisation pension scheme, you can't always change everything, but you will have the opportunity to ask questions, to see where people go, to get people thinking about these things. And even if it's just a question on whoever the pension trustees are, so that they know that people are interested, the more people that come along and say, hang on a minute, where's this invested, the more likely they are to do something about it.
Completely. And I think that's it. I think even just asking the question, even if it doesn't result in suddenly your company pension scheme changing, if you're in a big organisation, lots of people are asking similar questions, guess what's going to happen? Someone somewhere will be looking at it. So, and the same as if your own personal pension. So but it's a hugely powerful thing we can do, and like you say, chances are we'll probably perform better as well.
And it might just be that I mean, I don't know the answer to that question properly, but I was really surprised that that was the that came back to me, not you might not get as good a percentage on these things. So it was a delight to hear that, obviously. But I have to say again, and it's also probably a good thing for all of us to do, is sometimes you have to put your big pants on and do the stuff you don't want to do to make it happen. And there's some other stuff I probably need to do when I do the looking at the business stuff and looking at my sustainability, to kind of go, okay, this, you might not like this, but this is something you're going to have to change. Or
but you do get a warm fuzzy feeling afterwards. So.
Oh yeah, like I totally was like, right, I've done something good for the world today in doing that.
Completely.
And it might, in comparison to a lot of people, it's probably only a very small amount of money, but it's something. And we can so get lost in the idea that the big things are someone else's responsibility, and we can't control everything. You cannot control everything. Life is impossible, but there's stuff that we can do. And for me, that's a really big message of what we're taking away today.
Yeah, completely.
So, final question from me, because I think lots of people are going to want to find out more about you and what you do. So tell us, where can we find out, follow you, understand more about all of this amazing work you do in sustainability?
So the best place really is LinkedIn. So I'm quite active on LinkedIn. I'm very happy to connect with people on there, and I get a lot of people sort of asking questions and chatting to people there. So that's probably the best place. So Danielle Thompson on LinkedIn. And I'm always posting kind of advice and tips and things on there. So I'm happy to connect and hopefully share as much knowledge as I can in this space.
Excellent. So we will put that link into the show notes and on the socials so that people can click straight through. Danielle, it's been amazing talking to you. I am going to spend some time thinking about this stuff, and I'm clearly going to be in touch with like more, how can I do some of these things in my business, because I'd love to do more in this area. So thank you so much for being a brilliant guest.
No, thank you. Really, really enjoyed it.
Well, I really loved talking to Danielle about sustainability, her business sustainably, and how we might all be able to consider taking those really small steps towards becoming more sustainable. And it's a really interesting one from an employment perspective, from thinking about actually, is this things like the B Corp stuff, things that could help you choose your next employer in a way that makes you understand and know that they've been through some rigorous assessments? Is that something to look for? It's probably something I've never thought about before, and I'm loving that that is in my mind now. And the idea that just having a conversation about what is it we stand for environmentally, socially, with our people, and thinking about what are those ideas and where do we get. I love that we're totally aligned over everything we talk about in WorkJoy is this progress over perfection stuff. Let's just do something. Let's take a small step. Let's build that momentum, and to really consider mapping out where our own biggest impacts are in terms of our impact on these things. And that's going to be different for different organisations with different business models, with different customer journeys. And that's definitely something I'm going to take away and do, and consider all of those different areas from my business. And it'll be interesting to see where you take this. And also thinking about that, things that we can all do, things that we can consider. Think big, start small, just bloody well start. Great advice from her friend Sarah there. I'm going to take that as well. And even little things like considering our pensions, our investments, where are these things invested, and how can we as consumers take on the power that we have? So lots of great things for me to go away and think about. I hope that you've enjoyed it too. If you are interested in finding out more about WorkJoy, do head over to our website, createworkjoy.com, where you can find out more around the different programs and products that we offer. We have Club WorkJoy, which is an amazing community of people who are working towards getting more joy in their lives. It's amazing, so do come and join us there. Lots of different podcasts with loads of different conversations with amazing different experts in different areas. So do have a little listen. It was lovely to be with you today, and I will speak to you all soon.